Welcome to the Second Reading Podcast from the University of Texas at Austin.
The Republicans were in the Democratic Party because there was only one party.
So I tell people on a regular basis, there is still a land of opportunity in America. It's called Texas.
The problem is, these departures from the Constitution, they have become the norm.
At what point must a female senator raise her hand or her voice to be recognized over the male colleagues in the room?
And welcome back to the Second Reading Podcast for the week of January the 25th, 2021. I'm Jim Henson, Director of the Texas Politics Project at the University of Texas at Austin. Today, I'm very happy to welcome as my guest Ben Wermund, who is the Washington correspondent for the Houston Chronicle. You might have also read Ben's work in previous gigs at Politico and the Austin American-Statesman. He joins us from Washington, D.C., though he is a Texas native. Thanks for being here, Ben. And I don't think I've ever asked, where in Texas are you from?
I am from Leander, just north of Austin there.
Oh, okay. I was going to guess San Antonio because of your Spurs fandom, but you're in the sphere of influence there, I guess.
Yeah, it's the regional team at least for the TV station. So I grew up watching them, and yeah, how that
happened. Good. I'm a Texan by adoption, and all I can say is, as a Lakers fan, I'm going to tell you good luck next year.
Uh-oh.
And our audio technician may now cut me off. So we'll move on. You've written a lot of great stuff from DC recently, and you and I talked a couple weeks ago, and one of the stories that's hovering over and where I want to start is to talk about the junior senator from Texas. Ted Cruz has been very much in the news since he was a co-sponsor of the motions to question the votes in the Electoral College in the Senate on what became a very fateful day. So I wonder if you could start maybe by telling us, recap for the audience a little bit where Cruz was on that day and what he did. And let's talk about the fallout on that and what you're seeing now.
Sure. Well, yeah, I mean, on that day, he backed an objection. The way it works is the member of the House, or a member of the House, at least one, raises an objection to counting the electoral votes, and they need the backing of a senator to do that. Ted Cruz had already said he would support some of these objections. It was unclear which exactly he would back, but he ended up backing the Arizona results, and that was the first ones that came up because they go in alphabetical order. So that was the first objection that came up. Both chambers, the way it works is both chambers break off and they go and they debate the objection, and they were in the process of debating that objection when the mob of Trump supporters stormed the Capitol. So yeah, I mean, as a matter of timing, it really, he raised this objection and kind of made his case on the Senate floor just less than an hour before everything went down.
Yeah, and then I think what deepened my suspicion is whatever the subsequent judgment is wondering what you think about is he had to have been a bit surprised by exactly how that unfolded and the fact that the crowd actually did wind up in the Capitol, but he wound up continuing to support questioning the objections of the other states afterwards, right?
Right. And so, I mean, it's important to note that he's obviously condemned the rioters and doesn't seem to have had any idea that was going to happen. I mean, it wasn't like he raised this objection, at least from what we know. I mean, it doesn't seem like he raised this objection to try to encourage something like that. He was doing what he saw as a, constitutional sort of duty, and then this happened. But sorry, I forgot the other. What was the question that you asked?
Well, and so but they return after order is restored to the Capitol, and
right.
You fairly right that he did. You fairly point out that he winds up condemning the violence, but then they do continue with the objections, and I think that's been the rub since then for him.
Right. And he did have the support going into this. He reached out to a bunch of senators and got, I think it was 10 other to back his objection. Then there was separately Josh Hawley said he was going to object and did object to Pennsylvania's results. So he had a lot of support coming into this. And most of those senators dropped their objections after the riots, and he did not, obviously. And it's a little unclear to me. I think he could have pulled his objection, but I think he's basically said that it was already in process and it was kind of done at that point. They came back and briefly debated it and then voted on it. It was over. But I mean, nonetheless, he voted to object to Arizona's results and later voted to object to Pennsylvania's. So he did not drop his objections.
Right. I mean, that's they may not have objected as much as they may, on all of the states that they had targeted for objections, but they did choose to, in a sense, it has an odd feeling to me of kind of splitting the difference in a time where maybe that equation doesn't work so well. But since then, Cruz now has been under pressure, and the pressure, the criticism of Cruz, a lot of it has come from, I think, it's fair to say, people that were probably not Cruz fans or supportive of his career and advancement
right.
Prior to this. And I'm wondering how you read that, and if you have any updates since you've written about this, having been on the ground in D.C. and talking to sources, just how, I don't want to say serious because it's serious enough to have generated a lot of stories, but just how sustained and how impactful do you expect this criticism to be? What are you hearing?
I mean, obviously there's a ethics complaint that's been filed by some Democrats on the Hill, 7 Democratic senators. Honestly, I don't really see that going very far. They basically say that Cruz and Hawley were lending credence to the mob's cause. But I mean, that, like anything, that's a political process that it's just probably not going to go anywhere, from what I can tell, at least. And then, I mean, like we've talked about before, kind of whether this sticks or not depends on people in Texas to a great degree at this point. I mean, that's who he's answering to now. And I don't know if you saw the morning consult polling that came out late last week on his approval rating there, but it took like a 5-point hit or something, but it's still at 76%, I think, something like that among Texas Republicans. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of an indication to me that he might have angered a few Republicans here and there, but he still is pretty popular among the people who supported him anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was, I did read the story you wrote on that morning consult poll and had seen the poll, and I think that was relatively predictable. I think one of the interesting things in that poll that you pointed out in the story that you wrote for the Chronicle was that Cruz really still was, had better job approval ratings among Republicans than did Cornyn, not by a lot, the senior senator in the state. And that's very much a kind of same as it ever was factor in terms of Cruz's position in Texas. I mean, do you think it has is your read that it has any kind of material effect on his, fairly well-known and larger ambitions? I mean, after all, I think it's, without saying that there wasn't an element of principle in Cruz's challenge, one of the narratives that has taken hold, and you can tell me if you think this is wrong, is that, Cruz was very much following Josh Hawley in this to some degree, in the way that he jumped into the questioning of the Electoral College, and that this was really motivated by his positioning for the presidential election. Does this enter into that? Does it hurt him that things kind of went south? I mean, we said earlier that in between the time he introduced the first motion and this, and then they adjourned, the Capitol kind of explodes in this riot. That wasn't necessarily what he is expecting. What's your read, and what are you hearing from sources about how, if at all, this impacts his presidential ambitions?
I mean, it's obviously it's hard to say really, and nobody knows, but I kind of think that, I mean, the general thinking, at least from the people I've talked to, is that, people forget things really quickly. And obviously the insurrection at the Capitol is not something that's going to like fade away exactly. I mean, it's probably going to be a significant, historical moment, but to the extent that whoever his future opponents might be in a race like presidential race, are able to kind of stick that on him. I mean, I don't know. We're already saying that, President Donald Trump's or former President Donald Trump was impeached, and that's going to go nowhere quickly in the Senate. And, there might have, I could foresee, or I could, imagine if that impeachment had sooner, Trump was maybe still in office, if the timing was a little different, maybe a few more Republicans would have gone for it. But it doesn't seem like many, if any, are now. So I don't know. I just don't. I have a hard time believing that it will have major negative implications for him going forward. Especially, I mean, as you've laid out for me, he's kind of been at his lowest in terms of polling and support among Republicans when he's been at odds with Trump. So it seems like he's kind of still in line with that.
And how about do you think the same applies to the other Republicans in the congressional delegation that have, by and large, the majority of them stuck with Trump, during the questioning of the Electoral College? I think the number was something like 15 of 23, voted to rescind the electoral votes in those motions on January 6th.
I think it ended up being 16.
The morning of the 7th.
Texas Republicans in the House.
So yeah, that's right. Because one split her vote. It was kind of, she did Romney, right? Which I really don't quite understand, but as a political strategy, it seems a little too cute by half. But it does seem to have worked for Romney. So what's the mood among in the House? I mean, is there any sense of remorse over this? Is it all doubling down? Is there a certain sense that among them that it will all pass?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't really seen anyone voice any sort of regret for this. I mean, everyone's basically said that they were doing what they view as their constitutional duty. They were speaking up for their constituents, and they condemn what happened in the wake of that. Nobody really has taken any sort of responsibility for potentially inciting anything with their own rhetoric, from what I've seen at least, or from who I've talked to. It's all, just doubling down, basically.
So in a lot of ways, I mean, it's somebody. I think asked me in a panel I did a few days ago or a few days after the inauguration, something about, what the mood of unity in Washington and whether, on day 2, it was, it had ended, as people began to respond to Biden from Texas on Biden's,
on day 1,
the Keystone Pipeline. Yeah, and I kind of said that was it did it even last through day 1? Is that sense feel right to you, being there and talking to people?
Yeah, I mean, I don't see Washington coming together right now in any way, shape, or form. I mean, it's still just as divided as it was, and I mean, honestly, all the unity talk is, been picked up by both sides to wield against the other side, essentially, which is, I guess, not surprising. But, I mean, you have Texas Republicans saying, with the Keystone Pipeline and those energy and climate actions that Biden took on his first and second day, I guess, in office, saying, what sort of unity is this showing to the Texans that rely on this industry for jobs? And
we talked a lot about House Republicans and about the state of, the response to Trump and the inauguration and the riot. Where are the Democrats now? You've written recently about Henry Cuellar and his kind of signaling on stopping the border wall, and about, other Democrats talking about the warning signs in the valley. Is there, are you seeing a little, more signs of life among the House Democrats?
Yeah, I mean, that's something I'm still kind of watching for. Just honestly, I'm really interested in how some Texas Democrats are positioned with Biden, who he's a moderate, but some of his actions on energy and stuff like that could put some of them in some tricky sort of positions. I mean, that's what Representative Vela was talking about. I think you're referencing. He's the new vice chair of the DNC, and I talked to him last week, and he was telling me basically he wants to be the voice of caution and reason in that role, and doesn't want Democrats to continue down some of the paths that they have gone down, or at least fix their messaging on things like energy and guns and police funding and stuff like that, that he sort of thinks was behind some of the losses they had in South Texas. But, on the flip side, I think that, a lot of Texas Democrats are getting what they want also, and, stand to sign on to some big things like the $15 minimum wage bill that Democrats rolled out today that has some Democrats from Texas signed on to it and pushing it. And it looks like, I'm not sure, I'm just going off of, what I've seen others reporting, but it seems like there's a chance for that to actually potentially pass through, the Senate with reconciliation. So, we'll see where that goes, but it does seem like there's, some optimism among Texas Democrats, but it's, I wonder whether there's some caution that's going along with that as well.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that, traditionally, Texas has had, it's a big delegation, and so there's bound to be more variety, but historically Texas is always, remains the home for more, for a larger share of people that are, to oversimplify a little bit, from the more moderate wing of the party. And I think the base of the party in Texas has become more liberal over time. If you look at public opinion polling and party identification of, and the ideological identification of the people that identify as Democrats, the party has become more liberal on one hand, but if you compare it to Republicans, it's still a much more heterogeneous party ideologically in Texas. In other words, there's still about between a quarter and a third of Democrats in the state still identify as moderate, where, the similar figure for Republicans is only, around 10% or so offhand. And so it's interesting that you're seeing that play out. Biden is managing that in national terms and in the big scope, but that fight has been something that's gone on for a long time in Texas, and it continues. I don't know if you heard this, but I'd talked to a state level elected official here who had been on the kind of debriefing conference call among Democratic elected officials that included both members of Congress and members of the state legislative delegation. And that was a very hot topic of conversation among the people on that call, this sort of how the progressive messaging had made it harder for Texans for Democratic candidates in more moderate districts. So I think that fight is just going to continue, and I'm interested. It's interesting that you see it there. I want to ask you a little bit more about the overall mood in D.C. right now as we kind of move forward. We've gotten through the inauguration. How much of an obstacle is this impeachment going to be for Biden moving forward with his agenda in Congress?
That's a good question. I don't know that it will have any actual effect as much as it just kind of offers a chance for Republicans to point at another reason why they, aren't jumping on his call for unity and maybe not backing some of the things that he hopes they would. But I don't know. I just kind of think that Washington was already very, very divided, and the impeachment's, I guess, a symptom of that, but I don't really think it's actually causing anything. But that's my read of it. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong.
Are you picking up signs of signs of buyer's regret among Democrats, or are they kind of still holding the line?
I haven't, from any I've talked to. It's I have to wonder what Biden thinks, and whether he, is a little bit annoyed that that's lingering out there. But I honestly, from anybody I've talked to, I haven't heard anyone express, regrets at this point.
Do you think the sense in Congress is that they really pretty much had to do it?
That's definitely the Democratic talking point, that they're doing their duty, and how could you, have a president who, in their view, incited this insurrection attempt and not not pursue impeachment and not pursue it all the way and try to, get him convicted in the Senate. And it does seem, to an extent, I mean, I can see the argument that they impeached him, so why would they just drop it at this point? Especially if the logic is that they're actually trying to punish him for what happened on January 6th.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're pretty committed at this point. I mean, I would be surprised if they backed off, but I also wouldn't be surprised if there weren't some people now a few weeks later, wishing there had maybe been another way. But that train left the station that often, but that still doesn't prevent you from having buyer's remorse sometime.
Sure.
I want to close up by asking just a little bit about the general mood in the city. I mean, Austin is far away. Texas is far away. And the images that came out of Washington really seemed like the city, was obviously transformed for the inauguration. I'm wondering if if there's a feeling of what the feeling is of the hangover from the riot at the Capitol, the unrest, and the aftermath of that, and the lingering sense that there are still threats, because there are still some guardsmen deployed, and just give us a sense of what it's like there right now.
Yeah, I mean, DC was totally shut down, leading up to the inauguration. I live in Arlington, and I couldn't really get there. I mean, I could, but it was not easy. And obviously some of that's gone away, but I think that there is sort of it's a weird feeling. I mean, what happened, and then what happened at the Capitol, and then having the need for, basically what felt like a military takeover of the city. And that doesn't just go away right away, for sure. I mean, I remember on inauguration night, there were obviously there were fireworks going off for the inauguration celebration, but I think there were some fireworks going off in my neighborhood too. And it was like, it was a little bit worrisome at first what that might be. So I think a lot of people are sort of on edge. You hear people on the Hill who were actually there. I was not. So, thankfully that's the case. But a lot of people who were, I think they're still, going through kind of the fallout from that and having to go back to the Hill. And I think it brings up a lot for them. So, yeah, I mean, there's definitely some lingering angst.
Yeah, I mean, I'm struck by the two kind of conflicting currents there. The fact that there is, on one hand, a lingering kind of anxiety or angst, as you put it, from the this pretty unprecedented and singular event, and on the other hand, the fact that it doesn't seem to have done much to erode the deep partisanship that has been driving politics in the city for the last couple of decades. I mean, it seems like those two things coexist kind of oddly together.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I definitely I'm pretty pessimistic on politics, at least in terms of things like how divided the country is. And there was a moment after January 6th where it seemed like, I don't know, are things actually going to change here a little bit? And that moment lasted about 5 minutes and it just got right back to business as usual.
The moment was 5 moments.
Yeah, maybe.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think once we saw the voting patterns in the aftermath of the riot, I mean, I think people were, if you're one of the members of Congress, say from the Texas delegation, just since that's what we're talking about, if you're one of the people that wind up voting for the motions anyway, with, the broken doors and the broken glass all around you, it's a sign that you're pretty committed and you're unlikely to really change your view at that point, right?
Right. And I mean, those people, those lawmakers are doing what they, feel their constituents want them to do. They're not going to do it if they're, for the most part, probably not going to do it if they're not going to get reelected or don't think that they will. So obviously they're not too concerned about repercussions.
Right. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that probably is, it's an interesting twist, and that's a kind of That's a Democrat, that's an explanation based on democratic mechanisms for people that were defending the threat to democracy, which, it's that's maybe a little too oversimplified, but I don't think by very much. So what are you watching moving forward, Ben? I don't want you to give up any big scoops if you're working on something, but what are you watching now as as we move forward in the next few weeks that you'd be writing on for a Texas audience?
Yeah, I mean, like I said earlier, I am really interested to see how some of the more moderate Texas Democrats interact with the Biden administration, and whether he does start to get some pushback on especially on stuff like energy, and I'm interested in his nominations moving forward. Today, Cornyn and Cruz both said that they wanted a Judiciary Committee hearing for his DHS pick because of immigration and how big of an issue that's going to be, especially for Texas. So, trying to figure out how this transition goes and kind of what role Texans are going to play in it, which so far has kind of been minimal. So I'm hoping they pick it up a little bit.
I think, speaking of business as usual, I think the sign that a lot of the Texas leadership and Texas elected leadership, particularly the Republican leadership, has seized on immigration as something to really focus on, is really one of those factors that was central and to me points to the fact that, a lot of the politics that were central to the Republican Party before Trump, are now going to be picked up again, and that the science of immigration is one of the hallmarks of Texas public opinion and politics in the state. It's a great unifier for the Republican Party in most circumstances. And I guess one of the reasons we're seeing those guys, the people like Cruz and Cornyn seize on it. And I think we've not seen the end of that.
Yeah, I mean, and it's obviously notable that immigration is the first big thing that Biden chose to kind of dive into. And so, watching that immigration proposal that he put out move forward, which obviously it's not going to become law, but, kind of seeing who in Texas goes for that and doesn't is going to be really fascinating, and kind of what members from Texas push for to get into that if it ever gets any traction. Be interesting too.
Well, we will look for you to follow the story from Washington. I appreciate you taking some time today. Thanks for being here. And you're welcome back anytime. Ben Wermund from the Houston Chronicle. Be safe out there.
Thanks for having me.
You are welcome. That's it for today. Thanks to Ben again for being here. Thanks to our staff and technical crew in the College of Liberal Arts and the Liberal Arts Development Studio. And we will be back again next week with the second reading podcast. Be well. The Second Reading Podcast is a production of the Texas Politics Project at the University of Texas at Austin.